All right, everyone. Happy Monday. I hope you're all doing good. It's mid-April. I got my good friend Dell roll with me tonight. Dell, how you doing, man?
I am doing well, brother. I am doing well. It's good to see you.
Yeah, you too.
I was just thinking, like, people who are watching this are probably wondering, do you have to have a beard in order to be a writer?
It helps.
Yes, basically. It helps. At the beginning of their path, you will look like Jeff. Years later, you will look like this.
I got some streaks of gray going on here in places, but I haven't quite. It makes up for the fact that I've lost it all here.
There you go. Funny true story. Like, literally, this was my last assignment before I retired from the agency. My teammates gave me a gift of it was Just for Men hair and beard dye.
Wow.
And it was like literally after I had done all their final performance reviews. So
so you couldn't hold it against them.
yeah. And there's kids watching, so I won't actually say what I said. So there you go.
That's a gift. That's a good gift.
It is a loving and kind gift.
I actually I sent one of my troops off today at work. He's going to a new base, and I got him a going away gift as per normal, but he got me a gift too, and that's the first time that's ever happened to me where somebody thought about giving me a gift. Now, it's like he got me a bobblehead doll of myself wearing a Houston Astros jersey since they're my baseball team, which I thought was really cool, but
as one does.
Yeah, that's the first time that someone's got me a going away gift when they went away.
That's pretty cool, man. That is pretty cool. Absolutely. That is very cool indeed. I was thinking, because we were talking earlier about, Jeff Clark gets to interview all these different authors and writers. And some of them are huge and really established, like, Mark Rainey and Don Bentley and Ryan Steck. You just had Ryan and Bertie on a while back. Have you had Jack Carr?
Yeah, I had Jack on last fall for his when he did his nonfiction.
So, you have all these amazing people that come on your show. And you get to interview them, and, that's awesome. But you know what? When was the last time somebody interviewed you?
Actually, I think it was when you interviewed me for
Shots from the Winchester.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that's when it was last. I don't do them very often anymore. I did them a lot when my nonfiction book came out, but that was almost 4 years ago now.
Well, golly gee Whittakers, I think this is the time to, give you an opportunity to talk about yourself, brother.
Okay. I don't do it very often, so this will be kind of a exercise in talking about myself. I don't do it very often.
That's right. Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to flip the script. That's what we're doing.
Let's do it.
So, Jeff Clark. Jeff is he's a good friend. He's a great guy. And what I see in Jeff, I think mirrors how I hope other people see me as you're like going through this path to become an established published writer, right? And the funny thing is, it's like if you want a nonfiction book, that getting a nonfiction book is out there. It's not. I'm not saying it's easy.
Mm-hmm.
But it's epically easier compared to this path that we're on.
100%.
Yeah, because it's something like what of 100 people that say, "Hey, I'm going to write a book," one actually finishes. Of those who've actually finished, you're talking hundreds, multi-hundreds, if not thousands, that actually get published by a mainstream writer. And yeah, what I love about you, man, is you are so humble about what you're doing. You're constantly trying to lift up everyone else around you. And that's just an amazing view.
Well, thank you.
So I think it's time we give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about yourself.
I appreciate it.
So Jeff, why do you write? What compels you to this hellish madness?
I think you'll probably echo this answer, and it kind of gives me an outlet outside of normal everyday life, where you get a chance to be creative. Like, I know when I was little, my parents didn't have a lot of money, so I had to use my imagination to entertain myself. I was either doing that, or I was in the shop working with my dad, working with my grandpa. Like, busy was not in front of a TV. It was not in front of an iPhone, so I had to get outside. So for me, writing is kind of like that creative outlet now as an adult. I get an excuse to play cops and robbers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I get to do all that again, but on paper, and it's really an outlet. I know for me, post-military, I needed something like that to do, to occupy my mind, to make me feel like I had a sense of worth almost. Like I had something of value that I could put on paper and almost quantify, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because it's this thing that you can create. And it's like, there are lots of things you can do to be creative, right? We know people who are potters and painters and what have you. But if you make a piece of pottery, you get to share that with like one person.
Mm-hmm.
If you do a painting, maybe one person. A little bit more with photography, but when you write stories, you can share that literally with the world.
Yeah.
And that's a really cool thing. And I think because you and I were in a critique group a while back, and I just loved your writing. I'm not sure where you are with that project right now, but I tell you what, folks, if you ever get a chance to read it, it's so much fun. Because one of the things I love about Jeff's writing is there's heart in it. You can feel that the characters feel like real individuals you might actually know. And in addition to that, it's like whenever you have an author who lived some facet of the life of their character, there's just this rich authenticity you're just not going to get anywhere else. So tell me, when you were a little boy growing up, and I totally hear you. I was raised on a farm, and I read a lot. And it was an opportunity to see the world. Were you a big reader when you were growing up?
I was, I read quite a bit, but I kind of went in phases, I went on a Michael Crichton kick there for a long time when Jurassic Park and, all his different books came out. I remember when it wasn't Congo, it was the other one.
Spear?
No, the one about the Ebola virus.
Oh, yeah.
I can't think of the name of it right now. I remember getting that Outbreak. Yeah. I remember getting Outbreak, and I read it in a day. I mean, I just laid on the couch and I just read it in a day. Like, my parents never complained about buying me books because I think, and to give them credit, I think that they knew that it fed into my imagination. And if I had my imagination, then I was keeping myself not only active, but out of trouble and into doing something that was going to keep me off the streets and yada yada. So I was in with the right crowd, so to speak. So they didn't have a problem with me sitting around the house reading a book or anything like that. But yeah, I read quite a few books. But when I got into the military, I really stopped. And a lot of people will pick up books in their downtime in the military.
Yeah.
And I didn't. I started starting a family. I was going to school. So I really kind of like tapered off until, I want to say it was when Mike Madden released his book Drone. And we were in a bookstore, and I saw it sitting there, and I just saw the cover, and it just says Drone in big letters on it. And I was like, you know what? I haven't read in a long time. My wife was like, pick it up. If it's no good, it's no good. I picked it up, and Mike Madden blew me away. Like, he's the guy. If I could pinpoint the guy that really got me into the idea of wanting to write a fiction book, it was Mike Madden specifically. Now there's other influences. I'm a massive Brad Thor fan. I think the world of him, Jack Carr, a lot of other guys. But Mike Madden really, he lit a fire in me. And it wasn't like, oh, if Mike could do it, I could write a book, right? But it was like his Troy Pierce character in that story was so cool to me. that I was like, oh, dude, I got to try to give this a shot one day. Like, I used to write little comic books and stuff like that as a kid, play in my
Mm-hmm.
room with paper towel rolls and stuff like that because we didn't have a ton of money. But, he really kind of fired me up and made me go, oh. And then after that, then I started getting back into Brad Thor. I read through the old Clancy books again, and it's been an addictive obsession that's been financially straining ever since.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
You know that.
The ridiculous amount of books in my house. I I don't want to talk about me. I want to talk about you, but I will add to that. Like, when you're in the military, you're in government service, you move a lot, right? It's pretty normal to move, every 2 to 3 years, sometimes every year, depending on what exactly you're doing. And for folks out there who may not have experienced that, you have got a certain weight limit based off of a bunch of things, like your rank, your grade, how, is it a temporary move, whatever. And it literally got to the point later on in my career where I would just rent a storage unit and put my personal library in it, rather than eat all the pounds you're going to waste on.
Yeah.
And it's not a waste, but all the pounds you're going to burn on on books.
It's tough.
It's crazy. Yeah. So that's awesome. And I love it. And I think that's kind of normal with a lot of writers.
Yeah.
Is that somewhere along the line you got hooked. Like Ryan Steck, he got hooked on Vince Flynn, on the Vince Flynn series.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty well known story. But yeah, that's awesome, man. So you went through a period where you read a lot, and then you joined the military, and life happens. Totally get that. You join the military, you've got a family, you've got kids. Maybe you're pursuing some advanced educational degree, but then something happens, right? Something happens, and you're like, oh man, I got to get back into this. You can feel that ember starting to glow. Was there any beyond that book you read, Drone? Was there something else that happened in life that compelled you to want to do this, or you're just like, I got to do this. I just got to do it. I got to figure it out. I got to do this.
So it was a couple years later I had retired, and I was a civilian, and I was an operations officer. And I think I've told you this before. I was like on the business side of a squadron of all the morale and welfare and support things on base. So I was the director of operations for all the business services. So I was like the number 3 in charge in the squadron. I focused on the business, and we just had a really banner year. I mean, everybody was doing a great job. We made tons of money that we were able to re-ingest back into, welfare programs and morale programs, for, airmen and guardians and even some soldiers. And we just had such a great year that we really just swept all the awards at, the headquarters level and at the base level. And I won a major award, and it went all the way up to the Air Force level, and I won at the Air Force level. And
wow.
It just kind of dawned on me as my wing commander told me that I had won. I just couldn't believe it. And he handed me a copy of the awards package, and he said, you need to frame this and always remember what it took to get here. And I just was looking over everything that was in that package, and I was just putting faces to achievements of all the things that other people did under my leadership. And I thought, I didn't do 90% of this. There's so many people that did all these things, and I just really felt like, I owed some kind of homage to them. And that's when I said, I'm really going to sit down and write a leadership book. Like, what are my philosophies on certain things, and write that down. And it took a couple of years, but that was kind of the big moment that really made me go, okay, I'm going to try to write for real. This is not a joke anymore. I want to put pen to paper. Even if I never, ever publish anything, I want to be able to say, I have something I can pass off to my kids and say, this is kind of Dad's lessons learned on leadership and awards and all these things that I had achieved over almost 15 years at the time. And I really wanted to have something to hand over to them. it just so happens that I met a couple of publishers at the time, and I got to talk to them about it, and they were interested in it. But that was kind of a big moment for me when I was like, okay, maybe I can actually do this. Let's try putting something together. Let's learn the craft a little bit. And I wanted to do fiction, but my purpose in life at the time, I think, was doing the nonfiction, because I felt like I had it all up here in the head, and I needed to get it out before I almost felt like I was going to lose it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally get that. My son has asked me on more than one occasion to write down my life story, my biography, if you will. And I'm kind of hesitant to do that.
Yeah.
But, maybe I'll get around to it at some point. But you strike a very salient point, being that you start to lose this stuff.
Yeah.
Memory starts to get a little fade, a little foggy.
Mm-hmm.
But that's cool. So tell us, I think it's very interesting to listen to what's the process that authors go through, and I'd like you to kind of share with the audience, what is your process? And I would like you to articulate, is there a difference between your writing process when you're writing fiction as opposed to when you're writing nonfiction? Is there a difference between the two, or do you approach it in a very similar way?
I think the approach is kind of the same. It's like, hey, let's build an outline and get a direction to go in. And then from there, you kind of let the keys do the work, and you kind of just speak through the keys. Specifically on my nonfiction book, I wrote the book, and then I felt like it didn't have that thing that kind of put it all together. It kind of just sounded like a book where I was just talking about different topics over the course of 26 chapters, and I was just kind of rambling on. I was like, what is the purpose of this? Nobody's going to listen to me, just blah, blah, blah. And that's what I thought of, the leadership algorithm type of thing. And that's when I put it into three kind of parts. And I kind of associated topics to the main premise of that section. And I did it for 3 sections. And that's how I kind of put it together. That way, over the arc of the book, you kind of got the idea of, you built upon this. It was a journey. It was a journey for the reader. And I also wanted it to where you could open it up to any page or any chapter and be talking and read a topic and take something away from it and close it and put it down. That was kind of cool. It's kind of what I wanted it to do. I wanted it to be useful if it was anything other than a paperweight. But fiction, I think everybody kind of has a different way of doing fiction. For me, I started off being a really serious plotter where I needed to plot out all 80, 90 chapters and subtopics within each. And I found that was counterproductive because I was trying too hard to make a narrative work because I had planned it out. And I think that limited creative freedom and ability to change on the fly, which I think is the beauty of a lot of writing, is that it's those moments where the keys were just doing the talking and you came up with a really awesome scene or a really awesome twist. And I was denying myself that by being such a strict plotter, because I'm a very organized person in my professional life. And I was trying to apply that to this, and it just wasn't working. And I think it was giving a really bad product. That's why when I pitched to my publisher for my nonfiction book, I pitched them a fiction book at the same time, and they didn't pick it up. And I know why now. They didn't tell me why. They gave me the simple answer of, we're just not ready to do that right now. And I know why now, because if I looked at it today, I would be disgusted with myself, because it was just a forced story. There's no depth. There's no love in it. There's no heart. It was just very strict. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. And I think there's another component to that is you just grow as a writer.
Correct. Right? Yes, absolutely.
I just went back and rewrote my first manuscript, and it literally took me 6 weeks to do it. But what was cool was I could look back at that original manuscript that I was utterly in love with, that I thought, this is the one. This is going to go places.
Yeah.
No one had any interest in it. But it's also because you become a better writer. you're growing, and you can look at it. You're like, okay, I see where all the mistakes are at.
Yeah.
So that's fantastic. Have you ever looked at any like specific any books in terms of structure or how you plan it out, like Save the Cat? Jack Stewart turned me on to Save the Cat, and I found it to be, you don't have to stick to it. It's not the Bible, but
Yeah.
It's really, really helpful in terms of helping you craft that structure, that skeleton of a story.
Yeah. I looked at Clancy when it came to how did he explain things. Clancy did a really good job of teaching you how to make a bomb without completely walking you through every step. I mean, he was pretty detailed at times. And you can't do that today. So let me premise that as well. You can't really do that today in today's writing, but you can learn a lot from, his 800-page, Rainbow Six book compared to what you're kind of capped at like 400, 425 today. You can still learn a lot about how he broke things down and explained things, and then you can learn to kind of shrink and create pacing. Brad Thor, for me, his pacing is just on point. He can write a 400-page book that you just zip through like it was 200 pages. So I really looked at Brad Thor for pacing and action and how he kind of keeps the momentum really, really rolling. And every year that I read his book, I'm just shocked at how fast it moves and how entertaining it is. And not everybody can do that for me, particularly as a reader. And then I kind of took a lot from everybody. I looked at Jack Carr. I looked at Don Bentley. I looked at everybody. A lot of the people that me and you both know, I looked at their books and I read through them and I asked myself questions like, how did they do this pacing? How did they transition? Why did they leave this chapter off here and then skip 2 chapters before they addressed it again? So I looked at that and I read a lot of older books and I became a student of the game. And I just asked why a lot. And I took notes of that to see, because you know this, when you write, you think, ooh, that sounded really, really good. But if somebody else goes back and reads it, it's not hooking them like it hooked you. You have to write to hook the reader, not to please yourself. And I think that's the biggest lesson that I've had to learn is if it sounded good to you, you need to close it and go back and reread it and then ask yourself, why did you leave it like that? And does it make any sense? And then you grow from there and get a little more creative, like transitions and cliffhangers and addressing things without addressing things.
And interestingly, that's one of the most salient pieces of advice that Stephen King gives is, it's killing your darlings. It's you may love it, you may think, whoa, that paragraph was exquisite. I'm a mad literary genius. That may need to get cut because it may not be nearly as good as you think it is.
Right. So, yeah, that's absolutely right.
No, that's fantastic. So when you sit down to write, what time of day do you write? Do you have any like little practices or anything like that that you do to get in your zone, if you will?
I tried to wake up early in the morning and write a little bit before I got ready for work, and I don't have the blood flow that early in the morning to be that creative. I think I need time in the day to kind of get my mind in a space, and my phone is full of notes. So I think during the day, that's been my best thing is just jotting stuff down. And then lately I've just been making it like I put my laptop out in the living room. So if I sit down on the couch, I have to look at it. And then I have 1,000 words I have to write almost every day. I try to do it 4 to 5 times a week, 1,000 words and at a minimum. And if I keep rolling, I keep rolling. And we just don't put on pointless TV anymore. And my wife will sit on the other end of the couch and read a book, and I can sit here with the laptop and just be hammering away. And I just kind of make that kind of my little to-do for the day is like, I need to get my words in, even if those words I know is maybe stuff that I'm not going to keep. Or maybe it's just notes. Maybe I go into a couple of chapters and I start jotting down some notes That's why I love Scrivener so much, and I've told you about that, because you can write notes into chapters that don't count against your word count, but they're still there for reference. So, maybe I go in and do some of that, and I do some plotting, and I do some, a little bit of strategy and stuff like that, and I just try to kind of hammer away at a little bit at a time. I think that's my biggest strategy is you have to make time, and it's tough, when you're not, when you're still working full time. A lot of people don't realize that there's not a whole lot of writers out there that are doing writing full time. A lot of people are juggling careers and trying to do it. You have to make time to do it, or the words will just never get written.
Yeah, that is so true. That and maybe the public doesn't realize this, but for every one author who can actually make a living off of writing, there's dozens and dozens who are published, but they still have a day job to make ends meet. You take our friend Jack Stewart. Now, granted, he's got a freaking awesome job.
Yeah.
He's a pilot, but he's still a pilot. Ward Larson is still a pilot. Most authors, have day jobs on top of everything else. So, that's a great point. And I love the fact that you do it on the sofa, and your wife is on the sofa, and she's reading, you're writing. That's really cool because, it does a couple things for you. One, you're still getting quality time together, and it kind of holds you accountable, right? It compels you to make that time. But the fact you can do it with your wife, that's pretty cool. Congratulations, man. That's nice.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, we she's really supportive of it, and she wants me to pursue it. And I've told her that it's probably not going to be one of those blockbuster things that's going to let me retire or anything. But at the same time, it definitely gives me something to do. And I think through some of my battles with anxiety and post-service, issues, I think she's really learned that, reading and writing mean a lot to me, and it's something that kind of keeps me even keel. You know what I mean? So, I promised her I wouldn't spend a bunch of stupid money on it if it didn't have any kind of, potential, return on investment in the long run. But I think she's very supportive in doing it in the first place, and I think that's probably what holds me accountable the most, is knowing that somebody believes in me and thinks I should try it no matter what the outcome really is.
No, and I think it's also an important lesson for your children. Like,
never stop.
A parent, exactly. Because I've said these exact words to my sons before. It's like, your odds of success are minimal at best. You are going to get kicked in the teeth multiple times, and you may never get to the finish line. But you're the one who makes the decision to take yourself out of the game. So remember that. No matter how hard this is, you just keep going. And, you'll get there. Or maybe you won't. But ultimately, you are the one who makes the decision whether to take yourself out of the game. No one else.
Yeah.
So it's a powerful lesson as a parent to your children. So, that's awesome. And you know what, dude? Even if you never do get published fiction-wise, and I know you will. I've seen your stuff. You're going to get there.
Oh, thanks, man.
It's like you can leave this for your kid.
Oh, yeah. Well, at worst case, I self-publish. I sell 100 copies or something on Amazon, and I still have something to give to my kids. Or it's still, my daughter wants to write right now. I downloaded Scrivener onto her iPad and taught her how to use it. And she was, trying to come up with a story. And I said, even if you don't do anything with this for real, the fact that you're doing this instead of playing video games or rotting your brain on TikTok, all good.
How old is your daughter approximately? You don't have to give the actual.
She'll be 16 this September.
That is awesome.
Yeah, she's very creative.
That's so very cool. That is fantastic.
Yeah, she loves it. Loves the iPad. Like, I've spent so much money on software for her iPad because she has the Apple Pencil and she draws. She's incredibly talented. artist when it comes to drawing. And then when she wanted to write, I was like, well, here, I'll download the software that I use, and I kind of explained how to use it. And she's like, cool, I think I'll give it a try. And I was like, go for it. And she's been working on something along the way.
That is fantastic. It's always, right? It's so rewarding when you can find, or not you find, but you help your child find something that excites them. So that's fantastic. So you use Scrivener. We've talked about it before. I know everybody says it's intuitive, like Apple products are intuitive, and I'm not an Apple guy, but whatever. At the end of the day, as long as you're typing and you're producing something, that's awesome. What other tools have you looked at or tried to help you in your writing?
Pro Writing Aid. I told you about Pro Writing Aid. I really like it because I feel like it's that editor that you need. It's hard to be your own editor because you've seen what's already written, and an editor gets that fresh set of eyes. Pro Writing Aid can kind of be that editor for you and kind of say, hey, there's too many commas here. Hey, you misspelled this word. Hey, you used this word to open up a sentence 3 sentences in a row. So it kind of teaches you how to develop your writing a little bit better. So I really liked Pro Writing Aid because it uses just enough AI to where it's coaching you, but not writing it for you. And I think that's where, for me, AI is a useful tool. It's where you're using it as an editor to help you develop your writing, just like a professional editor at a Big 5 publisher would do. It's not writing anything for you. You're doing all the work, but it's your coach sitting shotgun with you. So I really like Pro Writing Aid just because it really helps me think outside the box and kind of take that step back and get that 30,000 foot look at what I'm doing to see, if I'm hitting the target.
Oh, absolutely. And since you and I had talked about it, I now I'm using it, and it's a great tool. It really is.
It's awesome.
It polishes your stuff up a little bit more.
Yep.
And you're right. It's not going to replace, an editor who breathes, and actually is another human being, but it still really does help, especially because you may have little things that you just don't notice. So it's a fantastic tool. Love it.
Yeah, and I like it because I can just put words to paper and know that I'm going to run it through Pro Writing Aid later to do my editing and my spell check and my grammar and all that. Like I can focus on just getting the story out and not worried about too much of the technical parts because I got Pro Writing Aid that I'm going to use to edit later on and help polish me up. So I think for me, that's kind of a freedom that I don't worry about too much of the grammar and all that. I'm just trying to get the story out. We'll look at that stuff later.
Very cool. So what project are you working on now that you think may get you to being picked up by a publisher?
So right now I'm working on 3 projects. I have probably a dozen on the big whiteboard over here, but a lot of things are in development, a couple thousand words here and there, big outline kind of stuff. I'm working on, you read part of that Hunted book where it was real outdoorsy. You read some of that. I've been working on fine tuning that. I've got probably
great, by the way.
Thank you. I'm probably 30,000 words into that one.
Okay.
Made a lot of progress on that. And then I know one of, our mutual friend, Ryan Stack, gave me some really, really good advice. And he was like, don't pigeonhole yourself into one genre, develop your IP. Yeah. Andrews and Wilson told me the exact same thing. Keep developing your IP. Even if you're not feeling like the idea right now, get the idea down, write it down. You never know when you might come back to it. So I did a lot of that, and I've just been recently. I didn't want to really do any kind of horror. I don't read horror or anything like that, but I really wanted to do a sci-fi book, kind of like what Michael Crichton did with the first Jurassic Park, where it was sci-fi with those horror elements, from but not the direct horror. That kind of offhanded horror where the dinosaurs are there. There's a threat looming, those kind of things where, you know, if you look back in the movies, the dinosaurs have like this much screen time over the course of a 2-hour movie. And it's not the screen time, it's the idea of the screen time. And it's the idea of the threats where maybe you never talk about it specifically, but you're talking about it throughout the book as the looming threat and that you build that tension that way. So I've been working on kind of a sci-fi book that is about, it's about an island. It's kind of set in the future, and the world finally sees a peace because they decide to kind of clean up the political corruption and send all these corrupt politicians across the world to this island where they're going to live out their final days.
Love it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's great. So it still has a little bit of a political spin to it, but this island, the truth of this island is that it was the place for genetic experiments and nuclear testing, and it's kind of one of those, secrets between the U.S. and Russia that have been going on for a very, very long time, and really nobody in current present day knows the truth. So they build this prison on this island, and they send these prisoners out there into this valley, and you got to fend for yourself, live the rest of your days, eating hot dogs and squirrels by the fire, and until you die. That's the punishment you get for ruining the world, essentially. And what they don't realize is that there's some kind of genetic monster that actually survived all of that, and it finally kind of wakes from hibernation, and it's out to do its thing amongst hundreds of prisoners that are there, and they basically lose control of the island, and they have to evacuate because this thing just goes on a killing rampage. And I really challenge myself with this one because I've tried to not, we used to talk about the protagonist and the antagonist. You have a really solid villain, somebody you really love to hate. He's got to have a focus element. Well, in this one, I wanted to have an antagonist that was there but wasn't. So I made it a point where when I went to go write about what this genetically modified beast looked like and all its characteristics, I went to the back of the book and I started a prologue or an epilogue, and I broke down exactly what it was in the epilogue, and I said I'm never going to speak about it in detail until the epilogue. And I want to write a book where you never really know what is coming, but you know that there's a threat there, and just challenge myself to really write something sci-fi and kind of have some scary elements to it. It's still got a military vibe to it because of the prison and a little bit of a political twist. And, I got a couple other twists in there. I'm just trying to have fun with it. Ryan has read part of it, and he actually thinks it's the book I need to develop the most right now.
Oh, cool.
I know.
That's very cool.
I didn't see it coming. He told me that on last Monday.
Wow.
I know.
That's pretty cool, man. That is pretty cool.
I know. I'm psyched. I want to hear about what you're working on too before we're done here tonight. So I'm not going to let you get away without talking about yourself for a few minutes.
Okay. All right. So now just general questions about Jeff. You're going to a desert island, right? What book are you taking with you?
Oh, man. Only one book?
All right. I'll let you take 5.
Oh, 5 books. I would probably take Mike Madden's Drone just because it meant so much to me. I'd take Rainbow Six by Tom Clancy.
Mm-hmm.
Probably The Hunt for Red October. That's 3. Probably the original Gray Man. First Greeny book. Man. It's kind of a toss-up. It'd be a toss-up between Jack Carr's Savage Son or Brad Thor's Full Black.
Okay. All right. Good. What is your favorite book that has been made into a movie?
Oh, man. Probably my favorite is Jurassic Park. Because as a kid, you're growing up with not a lot of money. I could go out into the garden with cheap plastic dinosaur figures, and I could do Jurassic Park and all that until the lights shut off on the street. My parents had to drag me inside. So when that movie came out, I mean, my parents took me to see it in the theater dozens of times. I pre-ordered the VHS tape. I was there on the day that it came out. You know, I read the book. I have multiple copies of the book in different versions that I've collected over the years. So for me, I love military action thrillers, and I love a little bit of those action crime thrillers like Reacher. But man, a good sci-fi action book like Jurassic Park really just kind of fuels that fire and makes me feel like a kid again, and creative and just highly entertained. So, and I think every kid grows up loving dinosaurs to a degree. So I mean, if I had the money to buy a T-Rex skull to put right here on this table behind me, I would do it.
Yep. Or even a replica.
Yeah, a replica. Yeah, I couldn't afford a real one. It probably cost me $1 billion.
Your wife wouldn't know. Like, what the heck did you spend this money on?
Yeah, she'd be like, "That's cool, but how much did it cost, and why did you do that?" Without talking to me.
I would have been more satisfied if you come home with a bag of magic beans. So very cool. No, I totally hear what you're saying. Like Crichton. Classic Crichton back in the day, you know, Jurassic Park.
So ahead of his time.
Yeah, there was the one, I want to say it was Sphere.
Yeah,
they made it into a movie. Yeah.
Several of his books were turned into movies. Like, crazy how ahead of his time he was on some of this technology and the research that he did, you know, and you know, even his last one about eruption with the volcano that James Patterson helped write, you know, some of the things in there are kind of ahead of their time. And it was like, I think that's what I appreciate most about some of these books is that, you know, they're so forward leaning that you're like, that couldn't happen. And then when it does happen, you're like, how did they know? How did they know that? that's
apparently
fun.
We're bringing the direwolf back, you know?
Yeah. Did you see that actually happened? Wow.
I mean, yeah, they're cuddly now. Give them a year.
Yeah.
See how that works for you.
Yeah, they're over 100 pounds.
We're going to bring back the mammoth, too. It's funny because it's like, we've seen this movie. We know how this goes. 5 times. We're all about to get a 6th one or a 7th one. Like, we've seen it plenty. Because you know there is some knucklehead out there who's going to be like, yeah, sure. Let's give it a shot. And then you get this horrific, you know, killing machine that, you know, you need an AT-4 to put down. I mean, what the heck?
Well, and the technology now is what really scares me because the technology with genetic engineering was that you had to have a really good DNA sample in order to be able to rebuild it and get there. Well, I read how they did it with the dire wolf, where they basically said a dire wolf is so closely related to like this one species of wolf. So they were able to use AI and get tons and tons of samples of dire wolf DNA and put it to a computer. And then AI was able to look at a wolf species and look at a dire wolf, and it was basically able to rebuild the dire wolf's DNA strand. That's what's crazy, is now you might not have to have a whole sequence of DNA with AI, and these supercomputers can actually compute it and get you something that is really, really close to 100%. That's the scary thing, that we're no longer limited by what we can bring to the table. So now, could they create a raptor? Could they create a Tyrannosaurus Rex? It might not be too far off to think that it's possible with the way technology is, just because they did exactly what they said they could do with the direwolf.
Oh, absolutely. And neither one of us have, you know, the deep scientific backgrounds on that, but I would postulate that, you know, the things that we don't think are possible today could very well be possible in the not too distant future. I remember right around the time I was retiring from the agency, we still thought we were 5 to 10 years out from a stable quantum computer. They're real now. I mean, my son when he was looking at different universities, went to RPI at Detroit, New York, and they've got a quantum computer. It's amazing. So my point is, yeah, we may not know if it's possible today, or eventually we'll probably get there.
Yes.
But then that big basic question of the ethics of it. You probably remember a few years back there was a Chinese geneticist who had gone into a woman who was pregnant, went into the child was in utero, and he went in and modified the child's DNA using CRISPR, and it was for conceivably legitimate reasons, in that she was predisposed to a certain disease, and I don't remember what it was off the top of my head. But generally speaking, the scientific community is like, well, you're not going to experiment on a child in utero. You're just not going to do that. And somebody did. So the point here, and the relevance to the point I'm trying to make is, yeah, we may not be able to make a dinosaur today, but at some point we will. And there's going to be somebody out there who's not going to necessarily share our ethos and our philosophy, and just is going to do it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's scientists out there that do it just for the science. Just because they can. They're not concerned with, and not that they're irresponsible, but they're not concerned with the who, what, where, when, and why. They're more concerned with, like, it's not what I can do with this technology right now. It's what this technology, if I develop this technology, what could someone else do with it to, cure cancer, to, prolong life, to do this and that. And I think they look at it with a different kind of mindset and a different philosophy, that I have to push the boundaries in order for somebody else to maybe pick up what I did and run with it and do something twice as amazing. So they look at it kind of like that. And I can respect that. But then at the same time, I go, certain animals had their time. Would I love to have certain animals alive again today? Sure, that'd be fantastic. We're in a different world, though. And again, they've made 6 movies about how it's a bad idea.
Yeah.
It hasn't worked out yet.
No, it hasn't. Yeah, it's the same thing with, like, the Terminator. Like, really? You want to put AI
in a robot? No.
Again, we saw this movie. We know how it turned out.
Yeah, there's like 4 of those, and every time, a lot of people die.
Humans, so stupid. What are they? Oh, well, brother. Yeah, I got no more questions for you. I just think it was great to be able to turn the camera around and point at you for it.
Yeah, well, let's talk about what are you working on right now?
Oh, what am I working on right now? I just got started on, I think this is manuscript 7 or 8, depending on how you count them. But it's a new project, and it's kind of like I had gotten similar advice from Ryan as well. Don't pigeonhole yourself into one specific genre. And last summer, I had written the manuscript that something might be happening with. I don't know, but it was kind of like espionage adjacent, if you will. Whereas it was kind of a mystery that kind of unfolds on Cape Cod in Massachusetts. You have this individual he's a little milquetoast. He's a widower, but he's also one of the leading minds in quantum mechanics. His wife, who was lost at sea, was a naval aviator who went down over the Atlantic, and neither her nor her aircraft were ever found. So his life is destroyed, and he wants to go home and kind of start putting his life together. And he starts having visions and seeing things that shouldn't be there or aren't there, and wickered into this whole. It's not quite a ghost story, but it involves UAPs, and there is also a Cold War espionage story that's wickered into it as well. So, but I kind of got the idea when I was reading 4 Seconds. Actually, it was a couple of different things. I read 4 Seconds, and then it was a piece of advice that Connor Sullivan had given me that, write something big and outlandish and a story that only you can tell.
Yeah.
And so I loved in 4 Seconds how they took speculative sci-fi and wickered into a special operations story. I was like, that is just so cool.
They did a really good job.
Yeah, so that's the idea I had with that story. The one I'm working on now is it's in a way, it's kind of like a Scooby-Doo mystery sort of thing, where you have a guy he's works for the government. He's asked to come home by his brother to this small mining town up in Pennsylvania, up in the mountains of Pennsylvania. And what's happening is there's something going on. It's kind of like, it started out with, they thought it was just a predator that was taking livestock, and it started to escalate. And most recently, people started disappearing, hunters, hikers, and all this. And it's kind of being pinned on this old legend of the Cold Water Terror, which is this nondescript cryptid that lives in this valley that, going back to the indigenous people, they were like, stay out of that valley. It's called the Valley of Screams for a reason. Stay out of there. And in the end, it's not going to be a cryptid. It's going to be something very, very human. But yeah, that's kind of like, that's why I call it a Scooby-Doo, type story, where there will be a degree, some kind of espionage adjacent element to it, but it's going to be like, it's not the ghost, it's Old Man Smithers, the lighthouse keeper.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
That's cool. I like the I've been trying to work on a kind of a mystery thriller. I've struggled with it a little bit. I doing a little bit of the whodunit and the really investigative side, and my problem is I'm not very good at solving stuff like that. It's like I can watch me and my wife watch a lot of like true crime and documentaries and things like that. It just fascinates me. My wife sits on the other end of the couch and she figures it out in the first 5 or so minutes. She's like, I know who did it. I'm like, just shut up. Let me enjoy it for the next hour. I don't know what's going on. I like to be surprised. I like to be entertained by that. I'm not very good about seeing those little, I'd be a horrible investigator. I would just be a horrible investigator. I think I have an inquisitive enough mind to ask questions, but I just don't think I can see some of those cues very well, and I wouldn't be very good at it. And I've struggled writing that for that reason, I think.
I would say don't give up on it. Don't beat yourself up on it. And part of it is, like, when I started writing, I would look at all these other military/espionage stories and be like, it would never happen like that because it would go down like this. It's just, tedious and boring. And I think along the way, I learned to just like relax and enjoy the story, right? So my point is, you don't necessarily have to be you don't have to be a really super qualified investigator to write a story.
Yeah.
You just got to make enough stuff line up so that it makes sense.
Yeah, I think just trying to dabble away and talk about the antagonist in a way early in the book where this guy's the antagonist, he's the bad guy, he's the one who did it, but how is the protagonist going to figure it out? I think doing that has been my struggle of putting together kind of the case to prove my point along the way, but make sure to where there's enough questions in there where people go, well, maybe he's not. What does this guy have to do with it? What is he missing? So I think that genre will probably be my biggest challenge, because it's something I do like, but I don't think I'm naturally investigative like that. So it'll be, I keep going back to it, and I have a lot of character development and plot and stuff like that done, and I know where I want to go with it, and I think I have a really cool story, but it's the investigative part. Like I said, I'm trying to find that inner, investigator. And what I really need to do is, I know some buddies in the police department. I really need to go sit down with them and just pick their brains and tell them about the story and see what they would drop them. And I just need to invest that kind of time into it. And I think that will help develop that richness that I'm looking for that I lack.
And you'll get responses that you'll never quite imagine.
Exactly. That's why I need to do it.
I remember once I was talking to a colleague he's a retired police officer. And I said, well, what would happen if you found a human femur in the sandbar at the ocean? And he would be like, well, it's basically lost property until you can figure out who owns the femur. And I was like, what? And he's like, no, that's the deal. It's like, unless you've got a missing back, because that bone could be 5 years old, it could be 100 years old.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
You know what I learned about some of that investigative stuff is they don't put any evidence in clear baggies like they do in Hollywood. They put it in brown bags. They put it in brown paper bags.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, I'll be damned. That blew my mind away. And I thought, you know how many books I've read and how many series I've watched where they lifted up the Ziploc looking baggie and they dropped it in there and they just totally sold you off on the fact that that's correct and it's not.
Yeah, but it's like a brown paper bag that may be real, but it also just doesn't have a cinematographic punch.
Exactly. Yeah.
Very
Which is
cool.
a big part of writing, I think, is understanding when to be correct and have the details, honestly in real time correct, or have a story that is people can engulf themselves in. And I think sometimes, that can get you in trouble as a writer. That'd probably be my advice to people is like, you have to pick your battles. So how important is it to get this exact thing correct? And I think somebody at BoucherCon said it last year, and they said it really, really well. I can't remember what panel it was on, but they said the exact same thing. Like, is it important to call it a Glock 21 right now, or a Glock 20 or a 19 or a 17, or is it important right now to just call it a pistol? Like, how important is that detail?
Yeah. No, I think that's an incredibly important point, because now there are some authors like Jack Carr who he makes choices about the things that interact with the character, the character's world, because from his perspective, it tells you something about the character, that they make the choices that they make for whatever reason. But and that's good, and that works for Jack Carr. But I think a lot of times it's just a semi-automatic pistol.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes that's all it needs to be, and we tend to overthink it. And that's where we get in trouble, because we're like, I got to make sure that they understand that this is a Glock and it's got 17 rounds as opposed to 15. And it just makes you go, how important was it to break that down right then and there?
Exactly. I was a little shameless advertising for our mutual friend, Chris Growell, the trigger guard. We were in Chris is a retired Special Forces NCO, and we were talking about weapons and something about like my favorite weapon came up, right? And he made the comment, goes, my favorite weapon is the one that happens to be in my hand and is loaded when I need it.
That's
and
good.
It's like, enough said.
Yeah.
Enough said.
Yeah.
Just but the point is, I mean, like, for some people that's important, but I think for a lot of people it's a damn pistol.
Yeah.
That's all it is. So
yeah. And I think the writer who said that was not a guy with a military background or anything like that. And at first when he said it, I was like, well, that's kind of stupid. You really ought to get a little more specific about it. And, it's kind of important detail. And then I thought, you know what? It's not. And who better to explain that than someone who isn't a huge gun guy who has no military background or any kind of, clandestine background, like working for the agency or the FBI or law enforcement or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the fact that the threat is the gun. The threat is the pistol. Don't get so enamored with the details that it takes away from the story because you're enamored with the details. Like what Jack Carr does. Some of those things that are in his books define who James Reese is. It really gives you an idea of who he is as a person, as a character. But in other books, it focuses more on the action. So it's not really, what does it matter if it's a Glock or a SIG in the moment? Now, maybe if you're in another country, it matters. So then you got to know what you're talking about. And maybe if they pick up a weapon, they pick up a Russian version or something that's different, that's not familiar to them. And you can play with that a little bit. But I think going too far with the details can kind of distract from the story. Like it don't slow down the action.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. So, well, brother, it's been an hour and I've had a great time. Look forward to doing this again soon.
Next month.
I was boning up on current events and like what's the latest craziness that happened overseas, and apparently the Ministry of Defense in Poland is preparing for the worst, and I'm like, well, we didn't get to that. So.
It's kind of depressing too.
It is. The reality is, if the Russians do take Ukraine, Poland is next. And the problem with Poland is Poland's an actual U.S. It's not U.S. It is a NATO member state. So that's
not
a whole other bag of
Yeah, sure is. Yeah, well, we're going to do this again. You're going to come back next month. We're going to interview MP Woodward, so people should definitely make sure you like and subscribe. Follow Dell on Twitter and Instagram. He's on there. You can find him. And because we're going to come back next month. And again, Tom Clancy's next book, authored by MP Woodward. We're going to sit down with him mid-May, so be looking forward to that. And Dell will be back. Dell, thanks again, brother. It's always good to see you. We stay in touch weekly, so we'll do this again here in another month.
All righty, brother. You be well now.
You too.